My name is Betty Kit and welcome back to Creative Writing Media. In this video today, I'm going to be reading out part 4, the grand finale of The Jungle. This is part 4, the final part of The Jungle. I am so excited and so proud to show you this week's. I think by far this is the best episode. It's the most jam-packed with action, adventure, excitement, and if you remember in the planning, it's got a little bit of a sad ending, but you'll just have to wait and see how that actually turned out. So without further ado, allow me to present The Jungle Part 4. When they reached the top of the stairs that led down to the prison, the tavern was now deadly quiet. All the people that inhabited the little village must have gone back to their houses to go to sleep. Perfect. Almost too perfect. They started to sneak towards the door, as the man with the keys was mumbling to himself. "It will be okay, just make it to the door and you'll be fine. Just make it to the door." Fernando decided it would be best to break up the tension and ask, "Sorry, what's your name? I have to ask because, I need to know the name of the person who saved me from this place." He carried on mumbling to himself. "Hello? What's your name?" Sorry. My name is Felix." "Well, it's nice to meet you, Felix," Fernando whispered. They started to creep closer and closer to the exit, and the deathly quiet noise was deafening. They started to creep across the dark room, the floorboard creaking under their feet. The only sound that accompanied their footsteps were the coughs and wheezes of the people trapped underneath. This all seemed too quiet. Nobody had tried to stop them both. Maybe they thought that they could not break out. But then it hit him. How did Felix get the keys? And how did he know exactly which key was his? This troubled Fernando a great deal. He turned to Fernando with a look in his eyes. Felix looked back. Guilt was present. "Run," he said so quietly that Fernando barely heard. When the goat impaled himself on the machete, Tando vomited violently. Blood spurted out of the forehead of the goat, and the horns stopped inches away from his face. Then he got covered in the goat's golden blood. It gushed all over his tunic and splattered on his face. It stank of iron and steel. He cringed as he tried to wipe it off with a leaf, but the more impending problem was the fact that Bob was lying flat on the floor, his body in a crumpled heap. Fernando rushed over to him, covered in golden blood. He shook Bob by the shoulders. His eyes stayed closed, but a smile slowly crept across his face. I think I might be dead," Bob croaked jokingly. Tando sighed in relief and kicked him, smiling. Tando offered him a hand and he grasped it, standing up. After a while, sitting under a tree, sipping on some icy cold beers that Bob had bought, Bob brandished out his map. He pointed to the big grey building visible on the south side of the jungle. Then he pointed to where they were. Tando gasped and looked up beside him. He saw it poking out between the trees, a giant grey cobblestone building that towered above the canopy. Vines of the height of giants scrambled and scurried up to the top, engulfing the building in a green coat. Tiki torches surrounded the battlement-looking rim that encircled the top. A huge dark grey cloud loomed over it like a tsunami. A huge wave of thunder and rain started its journey, engulfing the temple. Tando was thankful that the shiny exterior of his metal arm was completely waterproof. He would have been fried otherwise. They needed to get there as soon as possible, from shelter from the incoming tidal wave of rain. Fernando ran and he didn't look back. He ran until he was far away from the village. He couldn't even see the faint sparkle of the village lights in the distance. But now he was completely lost. He pulled out his map as he recapped what the heck just happened. So Felix was undercover, trying to catch people out leaving. But then he felt guilty about tricking Fernando, so he gave him the tip and then he ran. He didn't think about the direction he ran in. He just ran. But the coughing had started to really bother him now. He had been struggling for breath whilst he ran, but now he could hardly take a breath without coughing. He wouldn't last long out in this jungle at night, so kept pressing on. He was preparing himself for a fairly painful trek into the jungle when he walked right into a mossy stone wall. He jumped out of his skin, but then came to a realization. He had found it. He had found the temple. This was where the treasure was. All he needed to do now was make it up to the top, and the treasure was his. He walked around the perimeter of the great temple and found a grand entrance. Stone carvings decorated around the archway. Statues of the people, young and old, could be seen, their cold, hard eyes staring into the dense jungle foliage. Vines had started to creep up their legs and arms, making it look like they were slowly descending into vines. He stepped inside. His footsteps echoed around the spacious inside. Spacious didn't really do it justice. Huge pillars held up the weight of the cobbled roof, the height of multiple double-decker buses stacked on top of each other. This place was huge. A tall, rather unsafe spiral staircase ascended on the roof to the treasure. At the end of the hall, a small fireplace burned slowly, casting long, dark Wait. A fireplace burned. Someone was already here. He had been beaten. All of this effort was for nothing. No, he couldn't just give up like that. He had come too far to give up now. Storming up to the spiral staircase, his anger boiled. They had made it. Tando and Bob had made a small fire pit in a doused fire pit downstairs, and now they stood watching the rain. They had come so far. They had been through so much together, and now they were here. The exotic birds chirped and cried as thunder continued to impose the horizon. Tando felt an odd sense of gratitude towards Bob. He had stuck loyal to him all this way and had never given up on him. What was this warm feeling that suddenly started to spread in his stomach? Friendship? He suddenly felt an urge to find this treasure and to do good with it. Be generous and help others with it. Donate to charities, donate to food banks, and various medical funds. His future was slowly unravelling before him. He could see it as clear as day. And Bob was beside him. A feeling he had never encountered before entered his system. Happiness welled up inside of him. He was so excited to do good with Bob alongside him. But that was when he showed up. Fernando reached the top and saw a man with a metal arm and a small podgy man beside him. These were the people standing in the way of his treasure. Tando and Bob looked at this strange man and sprinted to protect the treasure from when the unknown man came up behind them and both swept their feet from underneath them. They crashed to the floor. The man with the metal arm's face slapped against the cobblestone floor, and Fernando sprinted towards the chest, wrapped in chains on a pedestal in the middle of the roof. Tando was not having this. Man take away its fortune. He focused all his brain power into his arm, and it shot out and grabbed the strange man's legs. It was now as long as a fully grown snake. He slowly stood up and raised the man high above the roof, dangling him off the edge. Bob lay still, unconscious beside him. Fernando's legs were dangling above an empty space, where the jungle floor lay hundreds of meters below him. His stomach dropped, but he had to clear his head. He brandished his machete and started to prise the metal panelling off the arm. Tando panicked and threw the man across the roof. He was flung to the other side. His arm was now starting to frazzle, the rain having infiltrated the system. In a last-ditch effort, he retracted his arm and looked up. Fernando faced the man with the metal arm. They were both equal distances away from the chest. It had all led up to this one moment. They were both not going to let the other man stand in their way. They both sprinted at each other. But before they could make contact, Tando's arm blew up. His body was tossed aside like a rag doll, completely motionless. He hit the ground and rolled right to the edge. Bob's eyes fluttered open as he saw Tando's body slip off. He fell and hit the ground. Bob cried out his name Fernando walked up to the pedestal and opened the lid of the chest. The gold coins illuminated his face, and he smiled. He just smiled. 20 years later. The streets of London were cold and wet. Fernando sat on the ground, sodden to the core. He was shaking and shivering, his face sallow, his body weak. His eyes were sunken into his head. His worn-down fingerless gloves gripped his large overcoat. People scoffed and kicked at him when they walked past. Not a day doesn't go by that he doesn't regret what he did. Everything he did. This was his life now, and it was all his fault. He should have stayed out. He should have stayed out of that jungle.